inshallah we'll get picked up. We'll start where we left off in the book, Safinat Al-Naja, or the Ship of Salvation, and we'll be talking about that which necessitates ghusl. And this is, of course, one of the major things that someone needs to learn about, because, of course, there is impurity, and the types of impurity are broken down into major and minor impurities. And the major impurities are what we'll talk about now, and that which requires ghusl. And the minor impurities is that which requires wudu. So the author here, he says, Faslun mujibatul ghusli sitta. He says that there's 6 things that necessitate a ghusl. And he says the first one is ilajul hashafati fil farj. And this is intimacy. And so this is the first thing that would necessitate a ghusl. And of course it is as he mentioned here. And of course anyone who is following along like the book, they can read that. And the next thing is that he says وَخُرُوجُ الْمَنِي, which is also the discharge of semen. And this also is of the things that necessitate ghusl. And this is once that exits, then someone is sure of that, then in this case, they must make ghusl before they will be able to do any of the things that require tahara. And the next is wal hayd, which is also menstruation. This also is of the necessitators that obligates ghusl afterwards. And once the woman is finished with her period, then at this point, once it is completely finished, and then she needs to go back and pray, then it would become obligatory here. And also when nifas is the postnatal bleeding. And the reason it's called nifas is because the woman, once she gives birth, then it's as she's given a nafs into the world. Like she's given a nafs, which is like a soul. She's brought a soul into the world. So they call it nifas, or because the womb at this point, it actually gets yatanafas, meaning that it gets a breath from all of, or it gets a breath of fresh air from all of the turmoil that it went through during the time of carrying the baby. Also, the next thing of the 6, he says, wal wilada, and also childbirth itself. And this is assuming that there was no nifas, which is the postpartum bleeding. There was no blood. If there was no bleeding afterwards, then the wilada itself, according to the Shafi'i madhab, would necessitate a ghusl. And of course, this is a hypothetical scenario to assume that there would be a dry birth like that. That's something that is next to impossible. But if it were to be there, then the Shafi'i madhab, they say that this would also necessitate for the person to make ghusl afterwards, because it's like the discharge of semen. And the next of them is, he says, what's in 6, wal maut, and death. And death, this is for the one who died, and other than the battlefield with the kuffar. So like for the martyr that died in the battlefield with the kuffar, he would not be washed. But other than them, every single person, every single Muslim, then they would be washed upon death. And this is not an obligation upon the person who died, but this is a communal obligation on the people around them to make sure that the person is washed before he is then wrapped and buried. And these are that which necessitates a ghusl. Now, the actual act of ghusl has two main parts to it. And this is these are the furud al-ghusl, which he's going to talk about, which is that the arkan, and that which you have to have for the ghusl to be valid. Other than this, there are other things that are sunnah for someone to do for ghusl, but this is what is the arkan, which he's going to talk about now. He says, faslun, furudul ghusli yathnan. And so he says that the furud, or the arkan, that which someone has to do for the ghusl to be correct, are 2 things. The first one is a niyyah, which is having intention. An intention to raise that major impurity. So, and this is the intention to raise the major impurity. This is the first one. And then on top of this, then he says, وَتَعْمِيمُ الْبَدَنِ بِالْمَاءِ, and also to make sure that water reaches the entire body. And this is the only thing that ghusl is contained of. It's contained of these 2 things. It's just for the person to have intention. And of course, the reason for the intention is because we take showers all the time just for cleanliness. And so the difference between this and the act of worship, the only thing that makes the difference is the intention. So the person needs to have intention, and then um, and then he needs to make sure that water reaches the entire body, and this is the exterior part of the body. Anything that is on the outside of the body, water needs to run over it. It needs to reach all of it. So this includes between any nicks, between any nooks and crannies, and between any flaps of skin, and anything that would be shown from a person, like on the outside of their body. It needs to have water reach it for it to be valid, including all of the different parts of one's body. If they were to move around and it was to show something from that, then this also needs to be washed. Um, and so this is also an important part, making sure that water gets to everywhere. And similarly, if you were to have your hand is closed, and you were to wash your hand, you need to open up your hand to make sure you can get water to everything. So anything that you need to move around and open up within the body as well, to make sure water gets into it. Also, like inside the ear, making sure that water gets into the ear, and that which is on the outside. Everything that is on the outside of the body needs to be washed for it to be completed. Also, there's sunnah things to do while someone is making ghusl. And the first of the sunnah is for someone to say Bismillah. And so to say Bismillah at the beginning, this is sunnah for them when they're starting off the ghusl. The next is to remove any dirt or impurity on the body, like any of the any impurities on the body, especially around the private area, to clean this first. And then after this, to perform wudu like the wudu of salah. And this is as mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that he did this. And then to start by pouring water over the head 3 times, intending to remove the major hadith. And then to pour water over the right side of the body 3 times, and then the left side 3 times. And this would be the right side front, and then the right side back. The left side front, and the left side back on this. And these are some of the sunnah that are for the person who is making for making ghusl in that matter. Also, if somebody has like hair and whatnot, all of the hair needs to get wet, and like water needs to reach all of the hair. And this is also a part of that. So every single part of hair water needs to reach it, and also reach the roots under the hair that is on the skin and whatnot. And the next thing that he mentions is he goes into the conditions for wudu, and these are the conditions for wudu to be valid. And there, of course, wudu itself is a condition for salat, but we're talking about for the wudu itself to be valid, there are certain conditions for that. And so he mentions here, al-Islam. The first one, he says, Shurut al-wudu ashra. There's 10 of them, 10 conditions. And he says the first one is al-Islam. So, of course, for any act of worship to be accepted from someone, they need to come with Islam first and foremost. Because if somebody does not come with Islam, then everything else will be rejected from them. And then yuqbala min. And so the person needs to have Islam first. Then secondly, with tamyiz, and the person needs to be able to have tamyiz. And we mentioned this yesterday. And tamyiz, what it means is that someone can know their right from their left. They know how to clean themselves after using the restroom. And then they are able to follow instructions, usually to around 7 years old. And so this is a condition for the actual wudu to be valid. So before this, a kid like a very young kid, he just throws water in his face and everything. His wudu is not necessarily valid because he doesn't have tamyiz yet. And so, of course, he's not going to lead you in prayer without valid wudu. And then the next thing he says here, وَالنَّقَاءُ عَنِ الْحَيْضِ وَالنِّفَاسِ, also the being pure from menstruation and postnatal bleeding. And these things, this is also a condition for the validity of wudu. And for a woman, if she is on her period or in postnatal bleeding, then she is not allowed to make wudu. It's not allowed for her because it doesn't work. And then on top of this, then she is doing something that isn't going to raise any impurity whatsoever. And so it's as if she's playing with the deen. And so in this case, this is the condition for it to be valid, that she is not in this state. Also, وَعَمَّا يَمْنَعُ وُصُولَ الْمَاءِ إِلَى الْبَشَرَةِ. And also, they need to be free from that which prevents the water from reaching the skin. This is a very key point, that when somebody is making wudu, they need to make sure that their skin doesn't have anything that's separating or creating a barrier between the water that's coming onto their skin and the skin itself. So what happens occasionally is women will wear nail polish. And that nail polish creates a barrier between the water that should be washing the nail and the nail itself. And there's no way for that water to come through. So that barrier here, besides the fact that it could be like beautification in front of other people, that barrier here does not allow for the wudu to be proper. And so the washing of the hands was never completed, the wudu was never completed, so of course the salah is not going to be sahihah. It's not going to be valid if somebody were to not make wudu properly, meaning that there's some type of barriers between them and that. Also, like this is for a man, if a man was, say he was spackling or he was painting or something like this, and he has paint on his hand, a big chunk of paint, and he just washes right over on top of the paint. In this case, that paint was, if it was not permeable with water, then this would actually, if you were to pull off the paint, it would be dry under that. And so water never touched this place of the skin, and so his wudu is not going to be valid. It has to make sure that there's no barriers between the water and the skin from reaching it. This is very important. Only in the case of someone who is like a professional painter, say this person, this is what he does all day, and it's going to create extreme hardship for him. In this case, there is leniency in his case, but for other than him, then this is something that the person needs to make sure that there's no barriers between them and their skin. And of course, that the reason that he would get leniency is because this is his livelihood, and of course, the Sharia, if something is very very harsh on a person, then it opens up and it becomes easier. The next of them is, he says, وَأَنْ لَا يَكُونَ عَلَى الْعُضْوَةِ مَا يُغَيِّرُ الْمَاءَ. And so he says here, and also that there's nothing on the body part that would change the water. And water is what does the purification. It needs to be pure water when we talk about what is going to purify the person. And so if this water no longer is purified, it's no longer what we would call water, then in this case, it is not purifying. So say somebody has on their hand, they have soap. They put soap on their hand, and now when they wash with a little bit of water, if they were to get a handful of water, not like a ton of water maybe, but if they were to get a small amount of water and mix it with the soap that's on their hand, this water now becomes soapy water, and it's no longer pure water. So pure water is what we're looking for to raise the impurity. So even though, yes, it's mixed with soap, this mix is no longer purifying. The person would need to wash off the mix and then wash with water, like actual pure water that's not changing its substance, for it to be able to for it to be able to count for wudu. Of course, washing something is one thing, but for it to be actually purifying, it needs to be pure water that isn't mixed with anything else. And the next of them, of the conditions for wudu, is وَالْعِلْمُ بِفَرْضِيَّتِهِ. And also the knowledge of it being obligatory, meaning that wudu is obligatory. And so if they make wudu and they think that it's just a sunnah for them to do, and then they only get that which they intend from it. And that the person only gets from his actions that which he intends from it. So if they intend while they're making wudu, they intend to make wudu for the recitation of Quran. This is sunnah. If someone wants to make wudu for the recitation of the Quran, this is sunnah. So they'll get the reward of the sunnah. Well, this sunnah doesn't count for raising hadath. It doesn't count for raising that state of impurity. So if they want to raise the state of impurity, they have to intend this. And they have to know that it's obligatory. If they think it's just sunnah, then it wouldn't count for them. And so the next thing that he mentions, he says, وَأَنْ لَا يَعْتَقِدَ فَرْضًا مِنْ فُرُوضِهِ سُنَّةً, which is similar to it, and it's for him not to think that any fard action from the wudu is sunnah. So such as washing the face. Washing the face is a fard. It's an obligatory action from the actions of wudu. And so if he thinks that washing his face is sunnah, then at this point it would not be valid because he doesn't have the intention of doing the obligation. And it's for the regular person that doesn't know which one is which. Like he doesn't know that, some of it's fard and some of it's sunnah. This is enough for him. But he does need to make sure that he's doing all of the obligatory aspects of wudu. And of course, the obligatory aspects of wudu, as mentioned before, it's the niyyah, then also washing the face, washing the hands up to and including the elbows, and then wiping some part of the head, and then washing the feet. These are, and doing it in order. These are the furud, or this is the obligatory actions for that. Other than this is all sunnah, and like how many times somebody does it, and the rest of that. The next thing he mentions here for the conditions is, he says, وَالْمَاءَ الطَّهُورِ. And so then he says pure water, purifying water. And so this is of course, what is needed for someone to make wudu. It needs to be pure, purifying water. This is just what's normally understood as water. This is what counts. Even if there's a little bit of some type of chemicals, say in the tap water, there's always some type of chemicals or some minerals in it. There's no problem, as long as it's still considered water without you having to talk about anything else. Even like lake water or sea water, all of this is fine. And this is all pure, purifying water, as opposed to something that was mixed with tea, or mixed with Kool-Aid, or something, or mixed with soap. At this point, it becomes something else. You have to say it's soapy water, or it's some type of other drink. All right, the next thing that he mentions, he says, وَدُخُولُ الْوَقْتِ وَالْمُوَالَاةِ لِدَائِمِ الْحَدَثِ. He says, for the entering of the time for that salah, and also being continuous for the one who has a state of continual impurity. And of course, some people might have a state where they're not able to hold their wudu. Their wudu is constantly being broken, and it's not something that they can do about themselves. It's a medical condition. So in this case, the time for the salah needs to enter before they can make wudu. They need to wait for the time for the salah to enter, and then they would make the wudu right after the time for the salah comes in. Because of course, before the time for the salah, there's no point to make salah until the time comes. And so then once the time comes, then they would make wudu. And even though they're breaking their wudu, because they can't hold it, they have this medical issue, then they would go straight, make wudu, and then go straight to salah right away, and they wouldn't delay. And so these are the next two conditions for their wudu, is that the time for the salah needs to come in, and then they need to do it right away. There needs to be continuous for them if they are in this state. And this is and of course there's other ahkam that are in regards to these people, but in general they would also have to make sure that they wear clothes appropriate to making sure that nothing is spread from najasa if there is. All right, the next thing that the author here goes into is he's going to talk about that which breaks wudu, the nawaqid al-wudu. And so he says here, faslun, nawaqid al-wudu arba'atu ashya. He says that there's 4 things that break the wudu. And this is, of course, an important thing for one to remember of these things that break the wudu. And he mentions here the first of them, الأول الخارج من أحد السبيلين من قبل أو دبر ريح أو غيره إلا المني. And so he says here, anything that enters from either the front or the rear private parts, whether wind or anything else except semen. And so anything that exits, whatever it is, in this case, as he mentions, anything, it breaks the wudu, anything that exits. And he made the exception of semen, and this is because it obligates something greater than wudu. So in this case, it doesn't obligate that which is less than it, just out of the fact that it's something that exited. And so he makes that exception because it actually it obligates the ghusl, but it doesn't obligate that which is less than it. And this is maybe a complex issue, but this is how the Shafi'is, they look at it. They would say this obligates ghusl, not wudu necessary, but everything else that exits from one of the 2 private parts, then in this case it would obligate the wudu from that. He says the second of these, of the 4, and he says الثاني زوال العقل بنوم أو غيره إلا نوم قاعد ممكن مقعده من الأرض. And he says that the second one is the loss of the aql, or of awareness. And so like the loss of awareness through sleep or other causes, except sleep while firmly seated on the ground. And so this is the loss of the aql. And when somebody loses their aql, or like their awareness, then it's very likely that number one, the first of the things that break the wudu could have happened. It's very likely that they would have passed, maybe passed wind or something of that sort, and they wouldn't know. So if they lost their mind, then they no longer are safe from the first one. And it's a high probability that they probably did one of these other things. So in this case, it would break their wudu. And he says, except for the case of the person who is firmly seated on the ground. This person who is firmly seated on the ground, sitting up straight, then his weight is sitting down on his buttocks, and this is in a way that makes it hard for him to break his wudu without him realizing it. And so in this case, if the person was sleeping, and he was sleeping sitting up, and he was firmly seated on his buttocks, then in this case it would not break his wudu. Of course, if somebody heard him break his wudu, then they told him, of course, he broke his wudu in that case. But the sleep itself doesn't break the wudu if he was seated firmly sitting on the ground. If he was seated in a way like some of y'all, with your legs up, like that, then in this case it wouldn't. If you were to fall asleep, it's not gonna. Your wudu would break. It has to be firmly seated on the ground in a way that's not like open in this. All right. And when we talk about sleep, we mean like actual sleeping where the mind is gone completely. Not just like a person. Sometimes when somebody dozes off, they will still hear noise around them, but they don't necessarily make out what people are saying. They'll hear voices, and they'll be kind of there, but they're gone for the most part, but they can still hear stuff. The person still keeps his wudu at this point. It's only once his mind is completely gone, he has no sense of anything around him. At that point, then he's lost his wudu if he wasn't seated properly in this way. And so this is what is meant by sleep, not just dozing off, but like actual complete gone. This guy is completely gone. He no longer is present whatsoever. The the third one that he mentions here, he says التقاء بشرتي رجل وامرأة كبيرين أجنبيين من غير حائل. And so this is the next one, which is the view of the Shafi'i madhab here, which is skin-to-skin contact between an adult non-mahram, meaning marriageable, male and female, without any barrier. And so this is what is meant by iltika basharatayn. This means that the skin came to contact with other skin. Just any contact, whether someone was intentionally doing it or it wasn't unintentional. And this is between a male and a female that are kabirain. This is kabir, which means that the person is somewhere around bulugh. Not necessarily that the person has reached bulugh yet, which is the accountability, but he's somewhere right around there. And the same thing for the woman, that they're somewhere around there. If they've reached this and they are marriageable, meaning they're not mahram. If they're mahram, such as this is the person's mother, or this is a sister, or daughter, or auntie. In this case, this is not going to break the wudu. But if it's other than this, meaning that they could be married or they are married. If they're married, then they're of course not mahram if they're allowed to get married. So in this case, the Shafi'i madhab is that skin-to-skin contact, whether it was intentional or unintentional, it breaks the wudu. There is another view within the Shafi'i madhab which is slightly easier, which is the person who touches, it breaks their wudu. But the person who was touched, not intending to be touched, it doesn't break his wudu. This is another view which is in the Shafi'i madhab. And it also has weight to it. And if someone finds great hardship in the first view, the second view is has weight in it, and they could still be a Shafi'i upon that other view. Of course, if this particular view can occasionally cause hardship for people, but the view mentioned here is the Shafi'i madhab, and they base this off of the apparent meaning of the ayah in the Quran, where Allah says, "Aw lamastumun nisa," or the other reading of it is "Aw lamastumun nisa," lamastun, and which means just touched. And so while the touching could refer to that which goes beyond this, the wording itself encompasses the beginning of touching. So this is that which would break the wudu according to the Shafi'i madhab. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. The next of them, the four things that break the wudu, is he says مسح قبل الآدمي أو حلقة دبره ببطن الراحة أو بطون الأصابع. And so here the next of the things that breaks the wudu is touching of the private parts of the human with the palm or inner surface of the fingers. And so any of the private parts, if someone touches the private part with their hand, this makes they must make wudu. It breaks their wudu. And this comes from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man massa dhakara falyatawadda." Whoever touches the private part, then he needs to make wudu. Um, and this is the same regardless of whether it's oneself or say someone is cleaning a baby or something of this sort. Regardless of what happens, if they touch it with the inside of their hand, like the inside of their palm, or the inside of their fingernails, like or the fingers here. Like if you were to put your palms together like this, that which touches by putting your two hands together, that which touches, if this touches the private part, it breaks wudu. If it's the outside. Say someone is making ghusl or something. If the outside of the hand touches a private part, this doesn't break wudu, but it's the inside of the palm. If it touches the private part and breaks wudu, the person has to make wudu from there on. And so this is the last of these four things that break the wudu here that we have talked about. And and he says here, the next thing he's going to go into is that which is impermissible for the person once their wudu has broken. He says, فَصْلٌ مَنْ انتقض وُضُوءُهُ حَرُمَ عَلَيْهِ أَرْبَعَةُ أَشْيَاء. He says, whoever's wudu has broken, then it's impermissible for him to do four things. The first of them, as-salah, for him to pray. He can't pray. And of course, this is because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. That Allah does not accept the salah of one of you if he ahdath, like if he went and did a state of hadath, like he broke his wudu until he makes wudu. And so, of course, if Allah is not going to accept it, then we're not allowed to go into that way. We're not allowed to go into salah like that. It's haram for someone to do. All right. And then the next thing is, he says here, what tawaf. And making tawaf is also, this is preconditioned with making sure that that person is in a state of wudu. And this comes from the understanding of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said that the tawaf is like tawaf al-bil-bayt is like salah, except that we're allowed to speak during it. And so what is understood like salah, meaning that it needs to also have wudu for it. And so so tawaf needs to have wudu. Occasionally, if somebody tries to make wudu, they try to make tawaf upon the madhab of the Shafi'i madhab in regards to the touching of the woman. It can sometimes be hard. So occasionally, you might take another view, like an easier view when it comes to breaking the wudu. Like just if any skin touches in the Shafi'i madhab, it would break the wudu, and then your salah or your tawaf would be invalid. So of course, anyone who's trying to make umrah and whatnot, maybe take a different view, such as the view that the person who doesn't touch with any desire, it doesn't break. That's another view, or the view of the Ahnaf, which is that just touching in general doesn't break. And so this is a way if somebody needs to make sure that they do tawaf, and while they're in a state of wudu, they might have to take a different opinion there. Although it's possible to go to make tawaf in the Shafi'i madhab, but you just have to be very careful. The next thing he says here, وَمَسْحُ الْمُصْحَفِ, and also touching the mushaf. Touching the mushaf is impermissible for someone that is not in a state of wudu. And this comes from the Quran, where Allah says, "La yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun." And so, no one touches it except for those who are mutahharun, which are the ones who are purified. And this ayah, of course, it comes in the form of khabar, or like it seems to be in the form of khabar, meaning that no one touches it, meaning like that this is a state of fact, except for someone who is purified. Referring to the Quran, according to the many of the mufassirin, as they mentioned, that this is talking about the Quran that is not being touched. And if it wasn't talking about the Quran, but it was talking about the scrolls that the angels have that were bringing the Quran, then even more so for the Quran. And then the same thing as we would look at is this wording actually, and it could be a nahi as well. and like linguistic possibility, is that it's also a nahi, not just khabar. And also, alongside of this, is we also have the letter that the Prophet ﷺ he sent out to many of the people, and he said that لا يمس القرآن إلا طاهر, that no one touches the Quran except for one who is tahir. And so the person who needs that is going to touch the Quran, he needs to be in a state of wudu. And this includes the outside of the Quran, all of the pages of the Quran, and also carrying the Quran as well out of respect for the Quran. This particular view of that there needs to be wudu for touching the Quran, this is the view of all of this, like almost all of the Salaf. And to find somebody that doesn't hold this view is very, very hard. And even from the views of the Ahnaf, which is the most lenient of that, they still say that you cannot touch the words of the Quran like inside of the Mus'haf, except without that you're in a state of tahara. And so occasionally I've heard some people that have had strange views where that you can touch the Quran without wudu, no problem. For kids, this is understandable because it could be hard on a kid that is just learning. But once the person is able to understand wudu and to hold on to it, then he needs to make sure that he makes wudu for touching the Quran. And this is where the evidences are, and of course all the form of dahib are upon this general view, of course with details that are slightly different upon and that. Also, he says here, وَحَمْلُهُ, also carrying the Quran, also needs to have wudu as well. And then he mentions, as far as the one who is junub, which is the junub, is the one who is in the major state of impurity. He says, وَيَحْرُمَ عَلَى الْجُنُوبِ سِتَّةُ أَشْيَاء. So he says, and it's impermissible for the person who is junub, for him, 6 things are impermissible for him. The first of them, or the first 4, are the same as what we just mentioned. As-salah, at-tawaf, touching the mushaf, and also carrying it. And then add to that, وَاللُّبْثُ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ, and also staying in the masjid. And a lubth means that someone is remaining in the masjid for a period of time. If someone is junub, they're not allowed to stay within the masjid. They're allowed to, and this comes from the ayah where Allah mentions, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى, and so don't come near the salah. And here, as the scholars have talked about, the salah in Ibn Abbas, he says, meaning the places of salah, when you are sukara, or junuban hatta tagtasilu, or when you are in a state of janaba until you make ghusl. And so in this case, it's not permissible for someone to remain in a masjid while they're in a state of janaba. If they need to pass through to get something and whatnot, then this is okay. They're allowed to go through, merely just pass through, but for them to remain in the masjid while they're in a state of janaba, then this is not permissible for someone. So of course, if someone is in i'tikaf and they become junub, they wake up and they had a wet dream or something, then they must leave the masjid. They must leave the masjid, go and take a shower before they can come back. And then the last of the things that are impermissible for the person while he is junub is qira'atul Quran. And the reciting of the Quran is also impermissible for the one who is in a state of major impurity. And this is mentioned in a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that I don't allow the reciting of the Quran for junub, for the person who is in a state of junub. And also, the junub does not recite anything from the Quran. This is the wording of it, as well as in other narrations that the Prophet ﷺ would recite. He would recite the Quran at every single time, except for if he was in the state of janaba. And so in this case, he would not recite the Quran. And this is, for the person who is in a state of janaba, they do not recite the Quran during this state. And it's easy for them, like relatively. They make a ghusl before they recite the Quran, and then they're able to go back to that. Now the next level of things that are haram for someone while in a certain state is the one who is on their haid. And we'll talk about this. And he says here, وَيَحْرُمُ بِالْحَيْضِ عَشْرَةُ أَشْيَاء. And he says that there's 10 things that are impermissible for the one who is on their period. And so all of those things he just mentioned, up to the 6, like so he says the salah, tawaf, touching the mushaf or holding it, and also staying within the masjid. Like staying within the masjid is also not permissible for someone who is on their period. Like staying within it. If they want to move through, then this is okay, but to stay inside of it, this is not permissible. And then the also reciting of the Quran. And note though, for a woman who has memorized the Quran, or she is a teacher of the Quran, then for her, while she's on her period, for her to not be able to recite anything from the Quran, this can create a great hardship for them. And from this, many of the scholars have talked about and given concessions or fatwa that allow for the woman that is a memorizer of the Quran to recite the Quran while she's on her period, because she's different than the junub. The junub cannot remove this state. I mean, the junub can remove this state of impurity from himself. If he wants to recite the Quran, he can literally go and take a shower and come back and he recite the Quran. As far as the woman that's on her menses, she has to wait a full 6 days or however long until it finishes. And if she were to leave the Quran for this period of time, then this is going to be very hard for her to remain a hafidah, like remain as a memorizer of the Quran for 6 days while she's taking 6 days every single month off of her revision. This is very hard for her. As well as if she is a teacher, then this can also be very hard for her to change her whole teaching schedule whenever her time of the month comes. So in this case, they're given leniency, and this is the fatwa of my sheikh and also many of the other shuyukh that are even Shafi'i. They allow for a woman to recite while she's on her period, and also for the sake of her not losing the memorization. Another note about the Quran, about touching the Quran, when the Quran is mentioned, when they say mushaf, what we mean is the mushaf that is the Arabic Quran. And this means that the book itself is mostly Quran. If it has a, like say, a translation in it, and the words of the translation are more than the Quran itself, then this does not take the ruling of mushaf, and someone can touch it while they're in a state of impurity. So if they don't have wudu, then they can touch it and read from it, no problem, because this takes the ruling of a tafsir, not the ruling of a mushaf. And of the tafsir that are very brief, that have been given this ruling, is such as the Tafsir al-Jalalain. This is slightly more words in the tafsir than it is for the Quran, and from this, the scholars have said it's allowed for someone to hold the mushaf, or like hold the tafsir of Jalalain, which can be a mushaf. Like it could be a mushaf it could be on the side of a mushaf. And similarly to this, if you have like the translations of the Quran, most of the time the words of the translation of the Quran are more than the actual wordings of the Quran itself. And so in this case, if somebody had this, they can do that. They can read from this without wudu. Also, like this is electronic devices. So if somebody had a Kindle, or they had something on their phone or an iPad, and they're reading from this, no problem from this, or them touching the screen on this. This is not the same ruling as touching the mushaf while they're in a state of without having wudu. And also, if somebody had the Quran that's set up on they have a like an easel or something of this sort, or like one of the Quran stands, if they were to use like a pencil or like some type of stick and flip the pages with it, there's no problem with this as well. If they didn't have wudu for that, and they're allowed to flip the pages with something of that sort, and it just can't be them flipping the pages with their hands or with a gloved hand, because this would take the ruling of themselves. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. So going back to that which is impermissible for the woman on her period. So reciting the Quran, I mentioned that, and the fatwa alongside of this. And then also he says was fasting for a woman. If any moment during her fast she is on her period, her fast is invalidated, and it's haram for her to fast. So anytime, like so, and I've heard some people, they had weird understandings, but any moment that they're on their period during the day, from the beginning of Fajr all the way to the end of the setting of the sun, all the way this whole time, any moment that they're on their period during that, it invalidates the fasting for the whole day. The fasting is a complete act from the very beginning of Fajr to the end of the sunset. And so they must be pure for that whole period. Now, if, like, say, if they were to go through part of this and they were to have a hard experience, and all of a sudden their fast gets broken at the last couple of minutes or so, Does not mean that they lose the reward, but it does mean that that day isn't valid. They get a reward for their efforts, and Allah will never let anyone lose the reward. But they do need to make this day up, and this is the point here. So the fasting, it needs to be free from any type of menstruation. If they are menses, if they have menses, then they need to make up that day in a different day. And so also with talaq, also, and this is divorce. Divorce while someone is on their period is haram. It's haram while someone's on their period, and they need to wait until a time where she's off of her period, and also in a time where she has not been intimate with her during a period of purity. After the period, and then on the time when there's been no intimacy, then at this point, if someone wishes to divorce, they can divorce. Other than this, it's haram. It's a haram for them if the woman is a menstruating woman, for her to be divorced while she's on her menses, or in a time where she has been intimate with, then in this case it is haram to divorce. The next of them, and of course there's wisdoms behind this. There's many wisdoms for behind the times for divorce and why when it's allowed and when it's not. Also والمرور في المسجد إن خافت تلويثه. And also he says here that also going through a masjid for a woman who is on her menses this would be haram if she fears that she's going to soil the masjid in some way. And in that case, it would be haram. But if she doesn't fear for that, then it would merely be makruh in that case. And of course, as long as she's not staying in it, as previously mentioned. Also, وَالِاسْتِمْتَاعُ بِمَا بَيْنَ السُّرَّ وَالرُّكْبَةِ, and also pleasure with that which is between the belly button and the knees. In that case, this is also something that is, according to the Shafi'i view, then this is not allowed while she's on her period. And other than them, they said everything is allowed except for actual intimacy. And that is the view that Imam al-Nawawi held, that everything is actually everything is allowed besides actual intimacy while she's on her period. And this is the stronger view, wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Also, he's going to go into the next section here. He's going to talk about the asbab al-tayammum. And this is the tayammum is the replacement for wudu or also for ghusl if someone does not have this. And the asbab here that he mentions, like the reasons that someone would do a tayammum, he says there's three. He says asbab al-tayammum thalatha. And so there's three reasons why someone would do tayammum. The first of them is faqtul ma, and it's that someone would not have water. There's an inability for them to have water. Or the second one would be, he says, wal marad, and this is that someone has a sickness for some reason. If someone wanted to break it down even easier, you could say that is the reason why someone would go to tayammum is either because of a lack of water or the inability to use it. These are the two reasons. Like you either don't have water or you're not able to use it. And why you're not able to use it could be from sickness, or it could be, as he mentions here, وَالْإِحْتِيَاجُ إِلَيْهِ لِعَطْشِ حَيَوَانٍ مُحْتَرَمٍ, or for the need of using it, meaning the need for water because of the thirstiness, or like someone needs water to drink. And so then he's going to talk about, he says, hayawan and muhtaram, which is a protected animal. Bismillah. And so now he goes into, when he said, so there's the three reasons why someone would make tayammum. First, that they don't have water. Second, that there's a sickness, that if they were to use water, it would increase the sickness that they are in. Such as if somebody has a wound, if they have a wound on their arm and whatnot, and they were to wash their arm, then this could possibly increase the sickness, or like they could increase their recovery time. And this is something the Sharia does not call on someone to do. It doesn't need for someone to destroy themselves. Allah has no needs for someone to torture themselves in this sense. So Allah allows us to go to tayammum if there's a state where someone is going to increase their pain or their suffering or delay their recovery time. In this case, they can make tayammum instead of this. And and then the second one, he said, after this, he said, or that someone needs water for a protected animal, hayawan and muhtaram. And hayawan means like animal, but also it just means something that's alive, for a life. And then he mentions, وَغَيْرُ الْمُحْتَرَمِ سِتَّةً. Then he goes to the opposite of what is not muhtaram, which is respected or protected. And in this, there's 6 of these. And so he mentions these animals that are, you could say, like, or that which is living that is not protected, meaning that their life is not regarded with any type of value. And so he mentions the first one, which is tariku salah, the one who leaves off salah. This person in the Shafi'i madhab, this person is called to come back to the salah, and if he doesn't, then he has a death penalty. Of course, has this happened? No, it hasn't happened. There's never been a time when this has happened, but their life is not protected. If they are someone who's leaving off the salah, then this is not a person who he has his, he's at that pinnacle of where his life is actually protected from him. He's actually exposing himself to a had. Of course, has the had actually been done before? No, it hasn't. But according to like all of the madhahib, they all agree that the person who leaves off salah is supposed to be killed. This is what they all agree. Of course, with how this happens, then there's many details on how this is and whether or not they're still Muslim or not. The Shafi'i madhab is the person is still a Muslim. And we seek Allah's refuge from this. And so this is the first of them. And then the second one, he says, was zani al-muhsan. And so like the zani, the one who has been affirmed as a zani, the fornicator that is muhsan, which this person is the one who has previously been in, he has had intimacy in a valid marriage. At least once. And so this person, if he were to commit zina, then he is a zani muhsan. And of course, he also has a had that is to be applied onto him as well, which is death. And then also, he says, wal murtad, and also the murtad, also this is not a hayawan muhtaram. And so this is ghayr muhtaram. And so this is the murtad, and of course the same thing as the other ones mentioned, but of course they're not, the had is not something for him that is purification, but rather it's purification for the world. And then after this, he says, "Wal kafir al harbi." Also, the kafir harbi. This is not of the protected animals, and this is a harbi is one who doesn't have any type of agreement with the Muslims. So the Muslims haven't given him safe passage for anything. There's no type of peace treaty between his country and the Muslims' country, but rather this is a person that has no agreements with them. This is what's known as a harbi. Other than them, you would say the mu'ahid, and of course the dhimmi is someone who has some type of agreement with the Muslims. And this, or mustatman, which is someone who has safe passage, where a Muslim has said, you can be with us, and we'll give you safe passage. And so then the next one he mentions here, wal kalb al aqur, also a mad dog, and also wal khinzir, and also the khinzir, like a pig. These are all things that are not protected animals. And he kind of went off onto a tangent here, slightly, but what is understood here is that these types, like animals, if someone were to have animals with him on a journey, and this person, he didn't have water, he had water that he could make, he needed water to make ghusl or to make wudu, but he has an animal that's a protected animal with him, then he would give that protected animal's life comes first before he uses his water. But if it was of these unprotected animals that are mentioned here, then in this case he would not give them water, but rather he would make his wudu and use the water and let them be as they are, without having that water. And so this is the reason why he mentions whether or not if they're protected animals or if they're not. Of course, like in a pig and a vicious dog, not a dog that is for a purpose that isn't vicious or like that isn't wild or mad. In this case, of course, his life would be protected if it's like a hunting dog or for protection purposes. All right, now he goes into the conditions for tayammum in itself, and he says shurutu tayammumi ashara. He says there's 10 conditions for tayammum. The first of them, he says, an yakuna biturab. There needs to be turab. Turab is dirt, and this is dusty dirt. And so this is what it would need to be done with. In the Shafi'i madhab, they say that this needs to be, for someone to do tayammum, it needs to be dusty dirt. Dust, there needs to be dirt that there's actually dust. So if you were to hit it, there's going to be dust that comes up from it. The dust also, he says here, وَأَنْ يَكُونَ التُّرَابُ طَاهِرًا. And then also the dirt itself is pure. So it can't be something that is mutanajjis, And like say a dog urinated in this place, akramakumullah, then of course like this dirt here that was previously urinated on, it cannot be used for tayammum. And so the dust must be pure, or like this dirt must be pure. He says, وَأَنْ لَا يَكُونَ مُسْتَعْمَلًا. And also, it can't be something that is used previously for tayammum. So if somebody, they had dirt, and then they used tayammum with it, and then they pulled off the same dirt that they just used for tayammum, and they wanted to do tayammum on somebody else with this. It wouldn't work in the Shafi'i madhab. And this is because the dirt was used now, and since it's used, it's no longer regular dirt. It now has the extra characteristic of being used dirt for tayammum. And this is similar with water. So if I say someone were to make or they were to make wudu with this water, and then they were to catch the water that it comes off the first time it comes off of their face. They were to catch this water as it comes off, and then they were to save it, and they wanted to make wudu with it another time. It doesn't work. In the Shafi'i madhab, that the first wudu, like the wudu that comes for the fard part of washing, this does not get reused. It's not allowed to be reused. It's called ma'al musta'mal, and it's used water, and it cannot be used to raise purity again after that, unless it is mixed with a bunch of water afterwards and comes back to a normal state. All right, so this is that the dirt is not used. And then also, he says, وَأَلَّا يُخَالِطُهُ دَقِيقٌ وَنَحْوُهُ. And also that the dirt cannot be mixed with flour or something like flour, or something like it. And so, of course, like if you have dirt and you mix it with flour, then a part of this dirt, which you're going to be using for your face or to do tayammum with, it's going to be mixed with something that isn't dirt, and that thing that is not dirt will be taking up the space of what you would be wiping with. So instead of wiping your face with dirt, you're going to be wiping it with partially dirt and partially something that's not dirt, that doesn't count. So it can't be mixed with something other than dirt. It needs to be just straight up dirt. And then also, he says here, وَأَنْ يَقْصِدَهُ, and also that the person should intend the earth, meaning that he intends to get the dirt. So when he comes down, he hits the dirt with his hands, and so he needs to intend to do this. It can't just kind of fall onto him without him thinking about it. He needs to actually intend it. وَأَنْ يَمْسَحَ وَجْهَهُ وَيَدَيْهِ بِضَرْبَتَيْن. And also that he needs to wipe his face and his hands with two different hits. And this is the Shafi'i madhab on this, is that the person needs to hit twice. So when he comes and he gets the dirt, so if this is dirt here, so he's gonna get his hands, and then he's going to strike the dirt one time. You strike the dirt one time with his hands, and then if there's extra stuff, he's gonna knock some of it off. All right, then he'll wipe his face all the way across. Everything normally that he would wash, he wipes on top of it. And then he's going to have to do this one more time. And so he would hit one more time. And then he's going to get that dirt, come around all the way up top. And then also for this one, he's going to come around, come up top. And there he's finished. He got both of his hands. And he needs to do this with two different hits. The reason two different hits is there's a hadith about this. Even if the hadith is debated, the hadith is not it's not authentic according to many of the scholars. But the Shafi'i madhab, they hold on to the fact, or like they hold on that it needs to be darbatain, as it comes in some athar. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And also just to note, the Shafi'i madhab, when it comes to tayammum, they are of the most strict and the hardest of the madahib when it comes to tayammum. And if someone were to use another view of them, sometimes it's the one that makes life much easier. And so this is he says here, أَنْ يَمْسَحَ وَجْهَهُ وَيَدَيْهِ بِضَرْبَتَيْن, that he wipes his face and his hands with two different hits. He says, وَأَنْ يُزِيلَ النَّجَاسَةَ أَوَّلًا, and also that the person needs to get rid of the najasa that is on their hands or whatever. They need to get rid of this first. And the reason for this is because tayammum doesn't raise impurity, but rather it allows somebody to pray in the state that they're at. And so if they have najasa on their body and in some other place, they're not allowed to pray with that najasa on their body. So for them to then do tayammum, which is supposed to allow them to pray, they're already not allowed to pray for another reason. So this is not going to allow them to pray, so it wouldn't be valid. Because it's basically the whole point of tayammum is allowing them to pray while they're in a state of impurity. But they're not allowed to pray because they have impurity on their arms, say. So they need to wash this off first so that the tayammum will actually accomplish what it's supposed to do, which is allow them to pray. or else because they're already being prevented from praying from something else. So they need to, um, so, okay, so then he says that there shouldn't be any other najasa on this person first. And of course, this is a najasa that's not forgiven for that person, such as if the person wiped, then the little bits that is left is forgiven from him, and that would not prevent him from this. All right, and he says, وَأَنْ يَجْتَهِدَ فِي الْقِبْلَةِ قَبْلَهُ. And he also mentions this, and this is not a condition according to the strongest view, which is that he needs to look for the qibla beforehand, before doing tayammum. This is not a condition according to the strongest view in the Shafi'i madhab. This is a weak view. And he says, وَأَنْ يَكُونَ التَّيَمُّمُ بَعْدَ دُخُولِ الْوَقْتِ. And also that the tayammum needs to be after the time has come in first. For that. And so this is of the other things that is important. Of course, the only time that someone needs to make tayammum for like this is once the salah is obligatory. Before the salah is obligatory, there's no need to make tayammum. Once the salah becomes obligatory, then they would make tayammum after that. So say salat al-dhuhr hasn't come in yet. The person, he wants to get ready for dhuhr, so he makes tayammum. This doesn't count. He needs to wait until dhuhr time comes in, and then he makes tayammum, and then he can pray dhuhr. No problem. And so, but if he does it before it's time, there's no point for him to make, there's no necessity for him to pray. The prayer time hasn't come in, so there's no necessity for him to make wudu for this, or like the replacement for wudu beforehand. So he needs to wait until the time comes in, and this is also affirmed by other athar from the Salaf as well, from the Sahaba. Also, he says, وَأَن يَتَيَمَّمَ لِكُلِّ فَرْدٍ, and also that he makes tayammum for every single fard. And every single fard prayer that someone is going to do, they need to have a tayammum for it. So say it's for zuhr. So dhuhr time comes in, he waits till the time comes in, and then he makes tayammum for dhuhr. If he wants to pray the sunan around dhuhr, no problem. With the same tayammum, no problem. He can pray the sunan before dhuhr, and then he can pray dhuhr. Then he can pray the sunan afterwards as much as he wants. But if he wants to combine asr, say he wants to pray asr afterwards, then even if he didn't break any, what you would say, break wudu or something of this sort, then even then he can go and he can't pray asr until he makes tayammum again for asr. And this is what is mentioned from the Sahaba, that they mentioned that this is the sunnah. The sunnah is that you pray it with every fard needs a tayammum. And so every single fard, and so on, if they pray another fard prayer, they need to make tayammum regardless of whether they broke their wudu or that which would break tayammum or not. All right, the next thing he goes into, he says, وَفُرُوضُ التَّيَمُّمِ خَمْسَةً. And he says the arkan, or like these are the pillars of tayammum, are 5. The first of them, he says, al-awwal, naqlu turab, and that is to transfer the earth. So transfer the earth, so like the actual dirt. So when he hits and he's transferring it, he transferred the earth from the ground to his hands. This is the first one. And then the intention, he needs to have the intention, the niyyah, while he's doing this. So from the point of them doing this to the point of him wiping his face, which is the next one, he needs to have the niyyah. The niyyah is the connector of this. So transferring of dirt, the thani and niyyah, having the intention of raising or of removing the allowance of praying. This is what he would have the intention of. And so as far as raising the impurity, he doesn't have an intention of raising the impurity in the Shafi'i madhab, but rather it's the allowance. He has the intention of allowing himself to pray this prayer, or to do what normally would be impermissible for him to do without tayammum. And this is what he would intend. And so, and then he would wipe his face. That's the first part. Wiping the face, all of it that normally would be wiped. So he hits first. This is the first of them. And he has the intention while he comes in, and he wipes his face. Wipes his face all the way across. Of course, he doesn't have to get into under all the hairs like we talked about with water. Water needs to go under all the hairs. No, he just comes on the outside of this. And then this is wiping the face, everything that is the face in regards to washing it in wudu. And then al-rabi' in mash al-yadayn ila al-mirfaqayn, and he needs to wipe the hands up to the elbows. So then when he hits the second time, as was mentioned, then he would wipe all the way up to the elbows and come around, making sure that he's wiped everything from the elbows. The reason the elbows and not just the hands itself is because when Allah mentions the that which is to be washed during wudu, Allah mentions up to the elbows. And then after that, when he mentions the hands again, he says, فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ. And then he mentions, so to wipe with your face, and then also your hands. The hands that are mentioned here, the Shafi'i understanding, Imam Shafi'i understands, he says, the hands that are mentioned here are left in general because it was already explained previously in the ayah. Previously in the ayah, the hands were up to the elbows. So here, when it mentions hands, which it could mean all the way from here to up here, we leave it with the understanding it was previously in the ayah, which was up to the elbows. So here, it's also up to the elbows. And this is the Shafi'i view in this matter. Some of the other views, they took the apparent meaning of another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he said it would have been enough for you to do like this. And then he hit the ground, and then he wiped his kaffain only, which is just his two hands. And this is the apparent meaning of another hadith. And if someone wishes to hold on to this, then they're following on the backs of scholars. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. But of course, going all the way up to the elbows, this is a safer view. He says, وَالْخَامِسِ تَرْتِيبُ بَيْنَ الْمَسْحَتَيْن. And also the fifth of these, of the pillars, is making sure that he does the proper order between the two wipings. Between wiping the face first, and then another hit, and then wiping the hands up to the elbows. Next thing he goes into is he says, مُبْتِلَاتُ التَّيَمُّمْ ثَلَاثَةً. He says, that which breaks the tayammum are three things. The first of them that breaks the tayammum, مَا أَبْطَلَ الْوُضُوء. And so he says, that which broke wudu also breaks tayammum. All the things I mentioned before, anything that comes out of any of the passageways, a touching of a woman, or touching of a private part, or losing consciousness, all of these things, they break the tayammum as well. Also, he says here, Ar-Ridda, Na'udhu Billah, also apostasy, it breaks that as well. And the reason for that is because the person who is doing tayammum, he's in a state of, it's a rukhsa, it's something that is a relaxation for him in the deen. And so if he is not a part of the deen anymore, then there's no relaxation for him. And so he doesn't get this. Although, if someone were to commit ridda and they were in a state of wudu, then their wudu stays if they came back without breaking it. As opposed to tayammum, it would not stay. Because the state of purity actually was raised. As opposed to here, the state of purity is not raised. This is just allowing that person to pray. And of course, at this point, then he is no longer allowed to do anything. All right. With tayammum, and also he mentions here, وَالتَّوَهُّمُ الْمَاءِ إِنْ تَيَمَّمَ لِفَقْدِهِ. And also the third thing that would break someone's tayammum is if this person thinks that there's water, and the reason that he made tayammum was because there was no water. And so in this case, somebody he's on a journey and whatnot, and he made tayammum, all right, and now he thinks that there might be water. All of it comes to his mind, oh, I didn't check this bag, there might be water in it. As soon as he thinks that there might be water in it, he broke his tayammum. Like just the thinking that there could be water broke his tayammum. Now, even if he goes back and he finds, oh, there's no water, he needs to make tayammum again. As soon as he believes that there might be water, or he has the possibility of thinking there's water around him, then it would break his tayammum. And also, this is if he's not in salah. If he's in salah, that doesn't break his tayammum. He can finish the salah, but he doesn't add anything to it. And so if somebody is in salah though, and water does come, then the Shafi'i madhab is that the person is allowed to finish their salah, even though there's water in front of him. And it would be sunnah for him to leave off the salah and then go make wudu and then go back to it. But if he were to finish it off, it's allowed for him. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. All right. The next thing that he's going to go into is going to talk about some of the different things that are impurities, and also about the way of making these things pure. And inshallah, we will stop here for today, and then we'll pick up with these different types of impurities, and we'll finish off the chapters of impurity in the next class. Wallahu ta'ala. اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت واستغفرك وأتوب إليك السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته